Hello, everybody. I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes, and welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings. And as promised in last week, we are back to a Cat Who book. But this isn't actually typical of your regular Cat Who books. This is actually not only a collection of short stories, it's a collection of short stories, only one of which is actually even remotely really connected to the Cat Who series. This book, um, we'll just leave the cat staring into your soul for a minute longer, because I believe it's very important to every so often have some sort of visual content that isn't just a book cover. Um, and we're done. This is The Cat Who Had 14 Tails. And so, not surprisingly, um, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Yes, there are in fact 14. As I always say, I don't actually prep for these. The only one of these that is actually connected at all to the regular Cat Who series is the Mad Museum Mouser, and that one is set in Lockmaster, which is one of the municipalities in the area of Moose County, which is where the bulk of the Cat Who books are set. But the rest of these are just short stories. Several of them, Fut Fat Concentrates, The Dark One, Susu and the 8:30 Ghost, The Sin of Madame Floy, and Tragedy on New Year's Eve. Those were all published previously. Four of them in Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine. No, all five of them in Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine. Back in the 60s, 62, 64, 66, 63, and 1968. The rest of them, I assume, were written much, much closer to the publication date of this, which was 1988. These are stories about cats. Some of them are from the perspective of the cats. Fut Fat Concentrates, Weekend of the Big Puddle, The Dark One, and The Sin of Madame Floy. Those are all written from the perspective of a cat. These are also all mysteries. Some of them are lighter. Some of them are lighter mysteries, involving thefts and home break-ins. Some of them are murder mysteries. Tragedy on New Year's Eve is particularly touching, actually. Suso and the 8:30 Ghost is, it is a mystery, but it is one with an element of the supernatural. This book is really, I think, the first one that connected it all to the series that really shows Lilian Jackson Braun's tendency to sometimes throw in a degree of supernatural phenomena. In all of her Cat Who books, Coco is deemed to have some kind of psychic ability, which, after all, is the only reason that half the time he could know about any of the murders, assuming that you believe that him shoving a book off the shelf means that he was trying to communicate with Qwillerin. And Qwillerin himself believes that his mustache is psychic. Make of that what you will. But in this one, there is Susu and the 8:30 Ghost, which implies that the ghost of the murdered man comes to visit these sisters. Stanley and Spook, which I will go into more later, but frankly I find it the most horrifying. And I'm not entirely certain why I would find it more horrifying than anything else, but I do find it horrifying. Weekend of the Big Puddle is certainly one. And A Cat Too Small for His Whiskers. A Cat Too Small for His Whiskers actually stands out because it's the one science fiction, extremely light and fluffy science fiction, but science fiction nonetheless. It does stand out as different from the rest, because the cat that's too small for his whiskers is fairly clearly an alien. Um, although frankly, based on this particular story, I'm not entirely certain that the child at the center of it, I'm not entirely certain that his parents aren't aliens, because honestly, I have never seen a human being act like that. Perhaps someone else has, goodness knows, I don't have enough breadth of experience on the matter to be definite about it. Um, so the Mad Museum Mouser, the one that actually connects to, that actually very specifically connects um, to the actual Cat Who series. As I said, that's set in Lockmaster, in the Lockmaster Museum. The narrator, it's a first-person narration in this particular one. Some of these are an omniscient third-person narration. Some of them are a non-omniscient third-person. Several of these are first-person. This one is first-person from someone visiting minor museums of the Northeast Central United States. I honestly, by the end of this, I still don't quite know what's going on with why this person is visiting. She seems to be there for some reason to do with uh, either a newspaper or some kind of book research, but I actually genuinely cannot for the life of me figure out why she's there. In any event, that's just one about a cat who's extremely upset about a recent break-in, who is kind of hysterical and clawing at everything, which is how they figure out why it is the person who broke in did the breaking in. And uh, several of these, as I said, are several of these are just solving mysteries. Interestingly, there are one or two that are not solving mysteries. Tipsy and the Board of Health, actually, now that I think of it, that does connect to the actual Cat Who series, because there is a Tipsy's bar, and in the Cat Who series proper, and Tipsy's Tavern, rather, in North Kennebec, which does occasionally make an appearance in the Cat Who series proper. The one story that stands out to me as disturbing is Stanley and Spook, which is told from the perspective of a woman. She's a career woman, and she's, got a high-flying, solid career, and she gets a call from a friend of hers asking her to visit, and when she visits that friend, her friend has told her that she's got a son and a cat, Spook and Stanley. And when our narrator arrives there, she discovers that Stanley is the cat and Spook is the son, and that Spook acts like a cat. That this boy, who is in fact named after his father, he's James Jr. or John Jr. or something to that effect. But everybody calls him Spook. Yes, he's really Ed Jr., but he was born on Halloween and Ed called him Spook. And Linda, who is a successful young woman executive, just like the pictures in the magazines, she meets them, and by the end of this, we found out that they were close friends when both of their husbands, back when they were both married, were engineers working on a dam, and that the dam project fell apart. didn't get all of its required, didn't finish on time, didn't meet its various deadlines, but that her friend who had, when she went into labor, refused to go to the camp doctor. Remember, this is the 1960s in a out of the way, not merely rural, but someplace where you would be building a large dam area. And the camp doctor was apparently a drunk, and she just didn't trust him. And they wind up bringing in a midwife that everybody claimed was a witch. And at the end of this, we are left with the intensely unsettling feeling that Linda, who has posited that what happened when Stanley and Spook were born, as Stanley and Spook were born on the same night, that somehow this woman, as an act of vengeance, had switched the minds or the spirits or the bodies or something of the cat and the boy. And that when Stanley the cat gets run over by a car at the end of the story, that somehow he's run over by a bakery truck, and Spook starts acting like a normal child afterwards, and I was frankly left with the incredibly unsettled feeling that if Stanley was truly had half of Spook's soul and vice versa in some way, that in some bizarre fashion, in that moment, without even realizing it, Jane had lost one of her two children, one of whom was a cat. And that Spook had lost something that was almost like a sibling because, yes, they'd had that cat forever, and we become intensely attached to our pets and are very sad when they die. But if that cat was, in fact, had half of the kid's soul, there's a very, very disturbing outcome, concept, follow-up to that whole notion. This also has some very, very sad stories. There's a story of a young woman there's a story told by an older woman about her youth, and about how the nice man, Mr. Freddy, who ran the bank, had wound up killing himself. And she winds up saying that, Matt threatened to tell that Abigail and Freddy had been having an affair, and that Mr. Freddy was married to Abigail's mother. Mr. Freddy was Abigail's stepfather. And we get to the end of the story, and there is, pardon me for giving away the end. You know this is my all spoiler zone. You probably shouldn't be listening to these if you're not at all interested. And of course, the sad thing in this is that actually hearing the whole story is what makes this ending sound so poignant, is that the nurse comes in to speak to this woman who's being supposedly interviewed for some kind of collected oral history project, and the nurse comes in saying, "Oh, you naughty girl, you've been talking too much and tiring yourself. We have to put you to bed now. Say goodbye to your visitor, Abby. Wake up and say goodbye. Abigail? Abigail, wake up!" Mr. Freddy was married to Abigail's mother, then he was Abigail's stepfather. It's a very, very well done moment of another sudden inversion. And there's an incredibly sad Romeo and Juliet story about two cats told from the outside. I don't say that this is the greatest book of short stories ever, but if you're a person who likes cats, who likes a little bit of psychic mystery fantasy stuff, stories about little boys who are talking about the alien cat in the backyard, it's actually not bad, and ostensibly part of this series. So I will see you next week with a book that isn't about cats.